Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. Carrie, you look like you're glowing with good health.
So do you. I know it's more relevant for me, but we both look pretty good today.
You finally kind of recovered, or completely recovered, or perhaps, fingers crossed, recovered.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm recovered finally. It was like 5 weeks of on and off of being sick, which I have never in my life been sick that long, ever.
But now you're at the other end of the tunnel.
Finally. And so as a result, I feel pretty fucking good. We'll see how long that lasts because pandemic sucks and it's so hot now. Oh.
I know. It just switched over.
It just like that. What, it's Thursday, I think, of last week?
Thursday to Friday, yeah. I was like, I mean, there are places in the country where there's snowing and I'm just like, oh my god, it's 100 degrees here.
Yeah.
It's already 100 degrees.
Or 40 Celsius for those of us who are from countries that don't use Fahrenheit anymore.
Yes,
which is basically almost every country.
Convert it so people know how horrible it is here in the summer. I don't think people understand what it's like to do this every summer.
No.
Like, just like how I don't quite understand how cold it can get some places.
Yeah.
Just the opposite of how hot it can get here.
Right. And it's not just like, yeah, like you're saying, it's more like the length of it. Because if it was like even just 2 months, I think I could just handle it. But it's going to be hot from now until October. So we're in it for the long haul now.
Yep. I mean, we have the most beautiful, like, from October to like March. Is like,
and we got mostly a really nice April, so we actually got an extra long niceness, and we had lots of rain, which was unusual. So yeah, we've been lucky, and so we should stop complaining. But I'm gonna complain because I don't like it when it's this hot.
I know it's I don't know. I mean, my people are from the desert for like 5 generations, and yet I'm like, I'm uncomfortable. I'm a little uncomfortable. We were made for this, but shit. Well, this is our new podcast called Weather Corner.
Dispatches from the desert.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, I have some emails to read.
Please.
So one's pretty short from Loretta. Thank you so much for your podcast. I really appreciate your information, and you have helped me accept how my own voice sounds. I speak in a breathy voice. I don't mean to, and I don't hear it myself, which has caused me a good deal of trouble over time. I feel like your podcast has helped me to arm myself against the next man who tells me I should be a phone sex operator.
Oh.
Or my next boss who tells me I don't sound, quote, professional enough. Thank you. Thank you. Loretta, for letting us know, because yeah, that is total fucking bullshit.
Oh my god. I mean, I'm not surprised, but still disgusted by the idea of a man telling her that.
Yeah.
Oh god. Just let us talk how we talk. You know, I was thinking about it, and like all of these kind of like business journal articles that are like how to, you know, be taken more seriously at work. I'm just like, for one thing, fuck you. Like, you need to be hearing us differently. And another thing, the idea that it's just easy to turn off. Like, I couldn't turn off my vocal fry like that. Like, that's not how it works. Maybe for some people.
Right. You would have to have some, like, vocal training, but, like, why is that necessary? If you're going to be an actress, yeah, that would be more necessary because you need to have a bunch of different ranges to, like...
Right.
Inhabit a bunch of different kind of characters. But outside of that job?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Mm-mm.
Right. Yeah, you need to take me seriously.
Listen to the content of the words, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, so there are some things about, like, how to sound more professional that I'm like, okay, maybe that makes sense because you need to know what jargon to use in what settings. Because unfortunately, you know, like, every different aspect of your life requires a different set of vocabulary. Fine. But, like, beyond that, definitely not voice quality. No.
And yet so many people vehemently believe.
The way you said that vehemently is how I say it, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to say it.
Vehemently.
I don't pronounce the H.
Well, you know, my receptive vocabulary is much larger, obviously,
and maybe some people say it that way. I don't know.
But no, I might be the only person. I've never really said that word out loud. Anyway. Yeah. So thank you, Loretta.
Yeah, thank you.
And fuck those guys. God damn it.
I mean, you know what? The both are bad. Somehow I just find it anything to do with like, oh, you should be a sex worker. Like, it's fine if that's what you want to do.
Absolutely.
Like, there is no shame. But how dare someone tell you that that's what you should be?
Because of how you sound. Like, what? Okay, whatever.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We also have an email from Blake. Hey, team. With a wavy emoji. I love it. I recently came across your podcast after purchasing the book Word Slut and discovering a newfound interest in sexism and language. I listened to your first episode today on Vocal Fry. After listening to it, I went on YouTube to get a few examples as I didn't really get it. It's true. It's like, you just have to like train your ear. And wanted clarification. Holy shit. All I found were either videos shaming women for it or alternatively videos aimed towards women explaining how to fix it.
Well,
well, yeah. And on the other side of the spectrum, videos predominantly of men teaching other men how to better their vocal fry. Let me tell you, I was shook. I honestly had no idea. Yeah.
I didn't know about that third category.
Me either, but I'm not that surprised because when men do it, it's laudable. People like it.
Is it like how to be Ira Glass? What is this?
No, it's probably more like, like Benedict Cumberbatch or Jeff Bridges or like somebody with like more like a deeper voice probably is what they're thinking of, right? Anyway, I honestly had no idea how ingrained sexism was within language. Honestly, I'm blown away. Mostly disgusted. I've also been mindful of male dominant terms, i.e. you guys, etc., but fuck, it really is that bad.
Yeah.
I've also noticed my bias in listening to podcasts before. My partner and I have always naturally preferred even listening to male voice podcasts and realizing how far it is ingrained in all of us is a really nice wake-up call that a lot of work needs to be done. Especially after recent events in Melbourne. Thousands of Melbourne men in Facebook groups were caught out expressing desires of committing heinous hate crimes towards women, degrading and posting revenge porn of their exes. We have a long way to go. I hope I can learn from you both and help educate those around me, especially the men in my life. Thank you so much for this podcast and being so generous with your knowledge. So thank you so much, Blake. And yes, please do. Because men are more likely to listen to men, just like white people are more likely to listen to white people. Yeah. So yes, please do. And thank you so much. And exactly, like that whole email just encapsulates exactly what we've been talking about.
Tattoo that email onto my body. Bury me with it.
Yeah. It's
Put it in my sarcophagus.
Yeah, chef's kiss, man.
Yes, thank you, Blake. Well, that's really cool to get those emails, especially since this is a really fucking cool episode.
Yeah, this is a really fun one. And we talk about stuff that, like I had some passing knowledge of, but definitely do not have the level of knowledge, not even close to our guests' knowledge.
Yeah, and it's one of those conversations where like you think you're going to talk about one thing and then you end up not talking about that, but it doesn't matter. It's even better because it was just so amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, we were going to talk about some of that stuff. I really think that it's better to let the conversation go where it will.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're professionals.
I mean, we're sort of somewhat getting paid for this, kind of.
Exactly. Kind of.
Not that much, but,
Yeah.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So today we have David Bowles, who is a Mexican-American author from South Texas, where he teaches at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. He has written several titles, most notably The Smoking Mirror, which is a Pura Belpré honor book, and They Call Me Güero, which has so many awards. The Tomas Rivera Mexican-American Children's Book Award, Claudia Luis Award for Excellence of Poetry, another Pura Belpré honor book, and Walter Dean Myers honor book. I'm so excited to have you here, David. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm super excited as well. Big fan of the show, so it's a delight to be on.
Thank you.
We're a fan of your Twitter threads.
Oh
for
my
sure.
gosh, they're amazing.
And a little eclectic, but yeah, I mean, I have fun, especially right now in the times that we're living in. A little bit of light, from now and again, it's a nice thing to have. Twitter is often a place of darkness and bullying and division and so forth, and I just try to shine a light in the darkness.
Oh, you
Well,
absolutely
you
do.
Sometimes I get mad at people and then say some ugly things, but for the most part, I ignore the
Well,
trolls.
I mean,
You're only human.
I know you would be superhuman if you didn't get a little angry sometimes because you have a lot of followers,
Right.
So you're gonna have some trolls. And you have these threads that are just a wealth of knowledge that it's like free knowledge. And there's so many topics, like you said, eclectic. Can we start with, in particular, you share a lot about Nahuatl. How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, I mean, hey, in English, most people say nahuatl, but like in the language itself, you would say nahuatl. And so a lot of people can't do that at the end. So I tell people say nawat or nawal or something along those lines.
Okay.
Nawat, yeah. Interestingly enough, there are about 30 modern variants of the language. Some of them so mutually unintelligible they may as well be like separate languages. And in some of those, that TL consonant is pronounced more like a T or more like an L. And although in the majority it's pronounced with that strange combination of kind of like a Spanish T with the tip of your tongue against the back of your teeth or the alveolar ridge, and then like letting air pass laterally along the sides of your tongue. Essentially like the combination of like a Welsh double L and a Spanish T. So if that helps.
No, I don't think I have it.
It helps a small percentage of people.
You have to sit around going all the time, and eventually you'll get it. It's kind of like people who have a hard time with rolling their R's or those different sounds in different languages. The harsh sound in Spanish and in Hebrew or Yiddish. So certain sounds we struggle with. People who are predominantly English speakers, and other people struggle with our sounds. The schwa is not the easiest sound in the world for some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And R is also very difficult.
Yeah, that retroflex R, really, lots of fun.
You are not someone who grew up speaking Nahuatl, right? What is your history?
No, not at all. I didn't start learning it until I was about 39 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
I grew up bilingual English and Spanish. And when I was in 5th grade, I got bullied a lot. And so my parents pulled me out of public school and put me in this private religious school. And at the school, I mean, it was one of those K-12 kinds of private schools. And the pastor who ran the school began offering classes on biblical Hebrew and Greek after school for the kids who are at the high school level. Well, I was in 5th grade, and I really, really wanted to take that class. And so I approached him and said, brother, whatever his name was, can I go to this classes? He allowed me to. And by the end of the year, I was the only person still taking the classes. And I really got into it. I mean, it was just so fascinating to me. And then my love of perhaps dead or esoteric or more difficult languages kind of began then. And, I went on to study over the next few decades a ton of different languages, Japanese, Sanskrit, German, French, Italian, Portuguese. I became a polyglot. At the same time, when I went to college, and I was the first person in my family to do so, one of the things that I began to discover in like intro to anthropology courses and literature courses is that even though I'm Mexican American and I grew up like on the border, like literally 5 miles from Mexico, my schooling had nothing to do with like indigenous Mexican or even Mexican colonial concepts, ideas, literature, and so forth. In fact, it didn't have any Mexican American content either. Because of the frustration and sense of rage and injustice that I felt, I kind of went down this rabbit hole. I began to study in depth the folktales that I had grown up hearing from my grandmother Garza, and I began to discover the roots of those folktales in like colonial Mexico and the roots of colonial Mexican stories and folktales in pre-Columbian Mesoamerican sacred stories and philosophy. And over time, that led me to want to start writing about those things, and then becoming frustrated at the prosaic nature of a lot of the translations in English, and just wanting to like read them in the original Nahuatl, because the majority of the things that I was looking at was from the Aztec Empire, which led me to begin studying it. 10 years later, here I am. After a couple of years of studying, I tried my hand at translating poetry. There are only about 130 surviving what are called cuicatl, the songs, Nahuatl songs. I translated a bunch of them in a collection called Flower Song Dance, Aztec and Maya Poetry, which won a translation award from the Texas Institute of Letters. And that was really one of the things that got me excited about continuing doing the work was the reception that book had. Poetry is a tough sell, and then translated poetry is an even tougher sell, and then translated like pre-Columbian Mesoamerican poetry is like you're really reducing your readership to a very small sliver. And to get that award, and there was like $1,000 attached to it, whatever. It was like, oh wow, okay, I made more money with this award than I would have made with the sales of the books ever. So, and of course, as you guys, because you follow me on Twitter, you know that I have a multi-pronged like creative output. I like the role of translator and the role of transmitter of perhaps forgotten ancient knowledge, but it gets complicated with Nahuatl. You will have seen my back and forth with Magnus, who is just a really, really great expert in modern Nahuatl languages and in classical Nahuatl as well. And so, because he's like a linguist who's been studying this forever and is in Mexico working with speakers of the modern varieties, sometimes my obsession with classical Nahuatl, he's the kind of guy that can, call me back to the reality of the fact that there are still 1.5 million people speaking modern variants of the language, and that I need to be careful as I promote classical Nahuatl and talk about it a lot, not to erase in these conversations the reality that so many people speak versions of it to this day. Versions that I just superficially know and that I've never studied. When I'm in Mexico, I'm usually in Oaxaca. My wife and I have a house on the coast down there. And so I don't have a lot of contact with speakers of the modern variants. And so it's kind of a humbling thing. Like I simultaneously have this scholarly love of the language as it existed 500 years ago, and its children have survived to this day with a lot of influence of Spanish. And they have been kind of pushed to the side for hundreds of years in Mexico, and that kind of deprecation of the language that has existed for so long means that indigenous people often have not had the ability to study their language in a school setting and so forth. It's been, that all of those opportunities have been erased, especially since Mexican independence. Before the situation was a little bit different, and there was schooling in Nahuatl. Things have begun to change in the last 20 years. There's been a push for more schooling in indigenous languages in Mexico, but it is a really complicated thing.
So why do you think that people were so interested in this poetry that you translated? Like, what is it about the poetry or the language, or like, what was it that caught on?
Well, one of the things that I noticed from the get-go was that when people think about pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, the very first thing that comes to nearly everybody's mind is human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so for so many people, that's like a non-starter. They're like, here is a civilization that carried out hundreds of human sacrifices a year in a ritual way, according to a calendar, and it's super well documented, and there's no getting around it. People were sacrificed. it is really difficult for people to then desire to take the next step and understand the worldview that will lead people to accept something like that. And so one of the things that I thought was really important was in translating these poems, first of all, the poems allow you to see like the hearts and minds of pre-Columbian Nahuas in what we call the Triple Alliance that so many people will call the Aztec Empire. And letting them see like the actual emotions, the doubt, the philosophical meanderings, the loves, the rebellion, and then acceptance that you see in all these poems, it brings an awareness of the actual humanity of these people. When you take the Triple Alliance, like the government structure and the state religion and the things that they did, and you look at it from the outside, it's really hard to connect with. But when you're looking at the cri de coeur, the cry of the heart of an Aztec warrior getting ready to go out into the battlefield and going, is this worth it? They tell me that when I die, I'm going to be transformed and live in the house of the sun. But do we really know that that's true? I mean, there are poems that are like that like show this anguish about not being able to know. And when people began to hear me like reading in public places these poems, they were like, holy hell, they're just human beings. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, what did you think they were? They're not aliens. Of course they're human beings with a lot of the same concerns and issues and hopes and dreams that we have today. One of the things that I did in that book was provide background and a nice little forward, like little like notes for each one of the poems to try to get people to understand that because of the way the world had been created and the way the sun had been set in motion according to the beliefs of the Nahuas, all the gods had to sacrifice themselves so that their divine essence could be channeled through the god Ehecatl, the god of the wind, and shot into the sun so it would be pushed into motion because it was just hovering on the horizon. That their sacrifice becomes a template for the like individual bloodletting that people did, or like the larger sacrifices that were done in a seasonal kind of way. This notion that you have a blood debt to the gods. They were willing to pour their blood out for us, and we have to be willing to do the same. And most of the time, bloodletting was just like pricking the tongue or the earlobes or the fingers or whatever, letting drops of blood fall out. But as the empire became more organized and expanded more, these mechanisms of like more like mass human sacrifice came into play. I talk to people about just comparing that to militarization of countries and colonial mindsets and conquest and soldiers laying down their lives and the glorification of that kind of sacrifice and how it parallels what we see in the Aztec Empire, and people begin to see things in a different light. So I think poetry is a way into that, a way past what a lot of people see as barbarity into like the depths of humanity that are contained in these poems. And we're really lucky because the main collection, which is called in Spanish Cantares Mexicanos, or Songs of Mexico, has a huge variety of poems, like pre-Columbian ones and also some written after the conquest in those early decades, with multiple voices, including women's voices, and a lot of times women's voices that are pushing back against some of the patriarchal notions that existed in the Triple Alliance. So it's a really, really rich thing. And I just scratched the surface with the book. It was just a relatively small sampling, and that is the long way around to explain to you my interest in this poetry and what people's reaction was. And I tried to pick poems that would like really resonate and would thematically be things that we could connect to as modern readers of poetry in English, and I think it worked. People really, really received it well, and it's led to other opportunities for me, and really I'm happy that the small university press, Lamar University Press, took the risk in publishing it, because I was not an established scholar of Nahuatl or anything like that. I still am not an established scholar of Nahuatl. I'm like this outsider who has like a master's in English and Spanish and a doctorate in education, and is like daring to like translate classical Nahuatl. So sometimes I feel like I was born after my time. There was a time when people who tried to dabble in lots of different things had a place in the world, and now you're kind of expected to stay in your lane and do those one or two things that people accept you as an expert in, and the rest of it you're supposed to stay out of, and I just can't. It takes a bit of courage to do it in such a public way. It's like just to go on Twitter and say, I am going to translate a poem in Nahuatl for you right in front of you, like live tweet this thing out to you. And, people who are experts can come in and correct me or whatever. It's also exhilarating and fun, and it's a delight to see people like get interested in something that so many people have dismissed. And even in Mexico for hundreds of years, it was it wasn't done. You just didn't talk about that culture. It was gone. It was over. It isn't over. It isn't gone. It still survives in different ways, in syncretic ways, in modern Nahua communities throughout Mexico.
Yeah, it's really important that people recognize that, these people still exist in the millions. That, of course, sure, we don't understand the sacrifice stuff. It's hard. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. But, of course, they're still humans. I mean, what else would they be? So, we just have to keep reminding ourselves that every human is human, which is sad.
It is really sad. It's like what's happening right now with the coronavirus, this COVID-19. This notion that it's somehow like China's fault because it started there, and that Chinese Americans should be berated openly in the streets for being Chinese American. It's just madness. People, wanting to foist the blame on somebody, to have someone they can point a finger at, are just so willing to other individuals around them, and it's just a really disgusting thing. And I mean, if we're willing to do that to each other right now, imagine how much easier it is to dehumanize people from the past whose culture is so very different from ours.
You made the point of how it's very similar to the sacrifice that a lot of folks make when they go into the military.
Yeah, no, it's very true, Megan. And then also, if you think about it, there are other things that we do that the Aztecs would never have done, and that result in people's deaths or their misery. We just think about what this administration has done with refugees and undocumented immigrants, putting children in cages and many of them actually dying in custody of the United States. And those kinds of things would have seemed like ridiculously cruel and unnecessary to the Aztecs, even if they did at times, sacrifice not only like soldiers they had captured, but also sometimes children and women, and particular moments that were of great import to the empire. They had a network within their communities, the Calpoli system, that supported the needs of orphans and widows and things like that. They would have never, things like jacking up the rent when people are losing their jobs and not providing them healthcare and food and stuff like that. There were systems in Tenochtitlan and other Nahuan city-states to provide for people who didn't have enough to survive, and they would have been appalled at our callous sticking to the law. Like, oh, they came here illegally. They shouldn't have come here, and now they have to pay the price. I mean, that would have seemed barbaric to them. They would have looked at us as barbarians. The way we treat women, the way we're willing to let people whom we could easily help. Our country has the resources to help, to let them suffer and die, would have been appalling to the Aztecs. And so I don't know which is better, to have the nation killing people on the sly by denying them the resources they need to survive, or openly sacrificing people and providing the families of those sacrificial victims, a lifetime of support and food and so forth. I mean, if you were going to be like the impersonator of Tezcatlipoca or Huitzilopochtli or like one of the major gods, your family was set up for the rest of their days, because you had taken on this really, really important responsibility. Personally, the idea of the state killing anybody at all, whether through sacrifice or neglect, is a horrifying thing to me. I am able to coolly look at the two things and see that one is not necessarily better than the other, and that we really ought to be careful about how we stand in judgment over civilizations that have existed before us, that exist now, that do things differently than we do, if we're not willing to examine our own behavior and the pain that it results in. And I don't think a lot of Americans are, frankly, a lot of U.S. citizens.
No, definitely
No,
not.
they absolutely aren't. There are so many people that will not. And I hope that maybe even our listeners who are not assholes, if they haven't thought about this before, that they'll pause and think about it, because it's true that this whole value judgment on whose culture or what time and place is better than the other, or perhaps more barbaric than the other. But we really need to look at what we're doing right now and what our world looks like right now.
Yeah, think about the very things that are going on during spring break, where you have the government reluctantly telling people, hey, maybe you shouldn't be hanging out in big groups and running around, possibly passing this contagion on to other people. And there are just, frankly, a lot of people who are like, fuck that, I want to do what I want to do. And just going out, party, woo, it's spring break. And you're like, pinches pendejos, like, oh, man.
Exactly. I'm struck right now by how people do view Mesoamerican traditions and all of these things, because that was not the answer I was expecting you to say when Carrie asked you, why do you think it kind of struck a chord that people would be interested because they think of human sacrifice and they want to know more. But I'm glad she asked that. And I'm also glad she asked that because I've never really thought of translation as this humanizing thing. And that's amazing. Like, 'cause poetry, yes, so humanizing. I thought about that before and think about how it tells us about people. And translation is another. I'm so glad that we were able to kind of talk about this, because I've never thought about it that way.
In my book, Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, which is like another massive translation and adaptation project, which is really blends different techniques to try to weave together diverse sacred stories mainly from the Aztecs and the Maya, to create kind of like a mythological history of Mexico from creation to conquest. One of the things that I do is I retranslate and adapt to some extent the Nahuatl language stories of the Mexicas' exodus from Aztlan and they're coming into Anahuac, the central Mexican plains, by the lakes there that is now Mexico City, and how they establish themselves, and they go from being rejects and renegades and mercenaries to becoming the most powerful group of Nahuas in that region. And one of the major architects of all the things that we're talking about, like the institutionalized human sacrifice and state religion and so forth, was Tlacaelel. He was the Cihuacoatl, or like counselor to multiple Tlatoani, the multiple kings. It's really fascinating how the Triple Alliance is born. They have to, because there's an empire that exists before the Aztec Empire, and they have to basically defeat it and break away from it and create their own alliance. Tlacaelel gives a speech to the commoners. He's like, okay, we're going to do this thing. We're going to go fight against the most powerful empire in central Mexico, and we may win or we may lose. But we need your backing. We need you guys to give us your blessing. If you say yes, and we go and we fight, this is what we promise. When we come back, we will be your lords, and you will be our serfs, but we will take care of you. You will do what we say, but you will never want for anything. And we will lift the Tenochca, the people of Tenochtitlan, above everyone else. And if we fail, you can take our bodies and break them and make them into pozole and feast on us, because we will have deserved that. Whatever comes, we're doing this for you, and our debt is to you. Part of it is manipulative. Tlacaelel was a very brilliant statesman, and he was able to lift the Mexica, the Tenochca, out of relative obscurity into being the most powerful group of Nahuas over the course of about 50 years. But there's also, I think, some sincerity to his words. He believed that as an aristocrat, as a pili, a member of the Pipiltin, that his responsibility to the Masehualtin, the commoners, was like divine. He was divinely required to care for them, and if he couldn't do his job, it was just for him to be destroyed. And we see it. There are a lot of prayers that are preserved in the Florentine Codex. Some of them I've shared ironically on Twitter about how when there's a bad leader, there were like actual prayers that the Masehualtin, the commoners, would say to Tezcatlipoca, like, come kill this fool. This fucker, he's going to ruin everything. Please come and destroy him. And I mean, and that relationship is really interesting because the Nahua relationship with their gods wasn't like the Christian relationship to God or a lot of other religions' relationship to God. It wasn't one of absolute subjugation. When people would get sick or when their prayers wouldn't be answered, there were curses, like actual like state sanctioned curses that you could say. Tezcatlipoca, the god of chaos, was the one who was usually cursed the most, and people would literally call him fucker. You fucker. You have struck me down with this disease instead of taking care of me. I curse you. I spit at you. And like Tezcatlipoca liked that. He was like, I want my people to call me on stuff. I want them to have the guts to call me out on the bad things that I do. Because, that's another thing that I try to talk about in Feathered Serpent, Dark-Hearted Sky is rather than a dichotomy between good and evil, the dichotomy is between creation and destruction, between order and chaos. And it's not even really a dichotomy. It's kind of like this yin-yang kind of relationship where the two things have to exist together in harmony. You cannot create something without first destroying something that exists. And you can't destroy something unless it's been created first. That the two things depend on each other, and they are kind of embodied by the gods in the Aztec tradition, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, the feathered serpent, and the smoking mirror, who in the Mayan tradition is called the heart of sky, hence the title, Feathered Serpent, Dark-Hearted Sky. And that kind of tension between chaos and order is really what's at the heart of Mesoamerican philosophy, rather than a fight between good and evil. If you had told the Aztecs, oh yeah, one day good is going to vanquish evil and we're all going to live in paradise, they would have looked at you like, are you a child? Are you really that naive? Good and evil? There's no such thing as something that's completely good or something that's completely evil. The gods are both, and we are both. That's not the goal. The goal is to find a balance between destruction and creation.
This is so much more understandable to me than Christianity.
Too. Yeah, and it actually makes sense to me because this is what my therapist talks about. She's like, okay, you're upset, and where's the gratitude? Like there's this yin and yang, the like you say, destruction and creation, the two sides to the same coin kind of thing. It's almost, or it's not almost, it's entirely more empowering.
I think so.
And more realistic. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I was not brought up Christian, so like part of it is I just don't understand it because I just didn't have it in my milieu. But
I love the word milieu. It's great. Every time I get a chance to use it, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm gonna say milieu now. Maybe somebody will understand. Maybe somebody won't. Carrie, I was actually brought up. So when I was 7, my dad converted from Catholicism, which he'd been brought up Catholic, to evangelical Christianity. And then shortly thereafter, because apparently it doesn't take very long, shortly thereafter he became a pastor. And so I spent a good chunk of like my formative years, I guess, in church. And then when I was 15 and 16, my dad like ripped off the church that he was a part of and dragged us away from like our family, and because he was running from the law or whatever. And then he abandoned us in South Carolina, and then we had to make our way back to the Rio Grande Valley. And as you can imagine, not too long after that, it took me a couple of years, but I kind of, I stopped going to church and gradually became agnostic. And one of the things that has happened to me in this going down the rabbit hole that I talked about that started when I went to college, it was, I think, most of us are engaged in this to some degree or another, like a search for meaning, right? A search for something that like fits, that when you hear it, you're like, yeah, that's it. I know that this is all made up. I know that we're all like living in realities that we've created for ourselves, but this thing that I'm reading has elements that I know are going to work for me, and I'm going to incorporate them into my life. I have a book of poetry called Shattering and Bricolage that was languishing in obscurity until one of my poems was quoted on Criminal Minds, and I was like,
What?
Yeah,
Like at the beginning?
Like, at the very end. You know how
Oh,
at the
the
end
end.
of each
Okay, they have it,
they
yeah.
do like that little quote, right? And so I have a poem called Kintsukuroi, which is about Kintsukuroi. You may have seen it. It's like this Japanese technique of creating like a ceramic vase or whatever, and you paint it, you glaze it, you fire it, and then you break it, and then you put it back together, and you use like the gold or silver or like whatever to seal it, and it creates these seams all over it, and so the poem talks metaphorically about that, and then like it ends with the lines, when wounds are healed by love, the scars are beautiful. And so those are the last lines that the main character, I don't watch the show, so the main character says at the very end. And like immediately, like the internet exploded, and people were like on Facebook, like messaging me, dude, they just quoted you on Criminal Minds.
Wow.
Goals, man.
Yeah, exactly. But that collection of poetry is about this notion of being broken, either like by the world, by other people, by just circumstances, or through deliberate self-dismantling, and then putting yourself back together. And I use the term bricolage, which is like a French term for creating art out of the broken pieces of different other things, and you create like a new work of art from the scattered broken bits of other things, failed attempts or whatever. And it kind of aligns with Gloria Anzaldua's Chicana philosopher. She talks about the Coyolxauhqui process. Now, Coyolxauhqui was an Aztec goddess, a Nahua goddess. She was the sister of Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and of war. And you may have seen the sacrificial disc that was at the foot of the great temple in Tenochtitlan that has like this goddess like in pieces, like her arms and legs and whatever, like in pieces. That's Coyolxauhqui. And the story goes that when their mother became pregnant with Huitzilopochtli, their father was not around, and so obviously it was like it's a virgin birth. But like Coyolxauhqui wasn't having any of that. She's like, "Yeah, sure, mom, you had a virgin birth. I'm just bet." Slut. And so she got her 400 brothers, the 400 stars of the southern sky, to gather together and attack their mom. And at that moment, Huitzilopochtli is born, and he kills all of his brothers, and they become stars in the sky. And then he kills, he dismembers his sister and throws her head into the sky to become the moon, and her body rolls to the base of the mountain, Coatepec, which is the temple that the great temple in Tenochtitlan was based upon. The philosopher Gloria Anzaldúa takes this and talks about the Coyolxauhqui process, which is, especially from a woman's perspective, when patriarchy or toxic masculinity breaks you in this way, you're scattered in pieces at the base of this mountain that represents patriarchy. What choice do you have other than putting yourself back together? And you put yourself back together, and as you're doing so, you're the one who's making the choices of what pieces go where and what you can discard. And you create like a stronger you. My poetry book, Shattering and Bricolage, kind of like takes off from that perspective, and it's like, I was broken when I was a teenager, and my journey along the way between being 16 and now 50 has meant like this recreation of myself again and again and again, reassembling myself, discarding things that are negative, almost kind of like this self-guided therapy through like smashing yourself again and again. Learning new languages does that, visiting new places, living in new cultures, because they force you to look at who you are and what you believe and what your traditions are from a different perspective, so that you can realize that you can change those things. You can make alterations. To me, this reflects a lot like in Mesoamerican philosophy and religion. the world had been created again and again and again. We're in like the fifth age, according to Nawathot, right? And each time, they make human beings, and human beings would kind of like not be all that great, and they'd be like, "Fuck this," and let's just tear this shit down and try again. Or like one of the gods would like rebel against one of the other gods, and it'd be a big fight. And between the two of them fighting, often Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, they would just destroy the world, and they'd be like, "Oh snap, we've destroyed the world." Didn't mean to do that. Sorry, guys.
Well, that actually kind of reminds me of like the Abrahamic religions, because the flood, and I mean, there's like a little
bit of that, right? Like leftovers from another time, from like oral traditions. You can imagine that originally, Yahweh, and as a Canaanite like desert deity, was this one of many, and like got into fights with Baal and people, and like just they fucked up the world and flooded it or whatever. Sorry, Christian listeners, Jewish listeners. I'm sorry, just not trying to make light of your religion. The notion of the gods not being perfect, and of needing to try and try again and work to get it better and find a better balance. That's really refreshing. Because then the goal no longer is our perfection, but just
getting a little bit better.
Getting a little bit better every day, a little bit better. And maybe we'll never get perfect, but we'll get better. We'll find a greater balance between the parts that have to coexist in ourselves. The idea is not to do away with our destructive impulses, but to learn how to channel them correctly and learn how to keep them in balance with our creative impulses. That's a lot more refreshing than this notion that you have to like totally do away with your sinful nature, because you're going to have quote unquote sinful thoughts every single day of your life. What a horrible way to live your life if you're afraid of sin. Anyway. Yeah, so I found a lot of relief in studying Mesoamerican thought and philosophy.
This knowledge that we get through translation, these gifts that you've given us by doing this translation work, seems to me to be one important reason why we should care and promote Indigenous languages. Do you have any? Why is it important that we promote Indigenous languages in general?
Certainly for us, the benefits are some of the ones we've been talking about right now. I mean, there's knowledge encoded in those languages that's often not been translated or not translated well, ways of knowing, ways of understanding, new perspectives that just in terms of it. And I know there's a degree of privilege to this, the privilege of being able to expose yourself to lots of different ways of thinking and pick and choose from among them to craft a new identity for yourself, a new philosophy for yourself. I realize that is something that can only come with a lot of privilege, because other people just don't have those opportunities. But for people that do have that privilege and that want to use the privilege in a responsible way, the only way to use it in a responsible way is to expose yourself to this ancient knowledge respectfully, without trying to profit from it, without trying to, to do a bunch of really gross things. There's obviously a bad way that we could be using the knowledge, and we want to avoid that. But the other thing is, preserving Indigenous languages also means preserving the diversity of human thought that exists right now, and using our privilege to undo some of the oppression and xenophobia and genocide that our ancestors or just other people from whom we have like culturally or sociopolitically inherited power have perpetuated on Indigenous people. Like, we have a responsibility, whether or not our ancestors were directly responsible for any of that, or just now that if we are, for example, the three of us, educated, scholarly individuals with some degree of respectability and a platform and so forth, for us not to use our voices to promote and protect the people who don't have the same capacity to do those things that we do, would be irresponsible and immoral in my mind. So just the richness, the linguistic richness of this planet is also just an amazing thing, just from a linguistic perspective. And I know we haven't really spoken very linguistically in this in this
That's okay,
conversation, which
yeah.
is okay. I mean, sometimes it happens on your podcast. I know. You follow the conversation where it takes you. But just in terms of linguistic diversity, the understanding of the way language can be deployed, the way language can express certain concepts, just a better understanding of the underlying like mental and cerebral mechanisms for the encoding of thought into language. All that stuff is, without diversity of language, you can't grapple with those the same way. And finally, I mean, just certain ways of looking at the world require, I mean, without becoming too like
Sapir-Whorfian?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Without becoming too Sapir-Whorfian, certain ways of looking at the world require certain linguistic tools, I would argue, or at least the precision of looking. Like, you can think about the world in those ways with any language, but like particular linguistic resources allow you to do that in a more focused way. And that inspire us to think about things that we have vague notions of, but we don't have like a specific way of grappling with or talking about. All those things I think are really, really important. And people should just be able to preserve their mother tongue. It's their fucking mother tongue. Why should they not be able to preserve it? Why should anybody take it away from them? The rest of us shouldn't have that right. And that means sometimes going to bat for them, and sometimes, working to preserve them and doing what we can, and studying them and becoming interested in them. The ones that are dying, sometimes it takes an outsider, and it's a horrible kind of system that we exist in that requires an outsider to come in and be like the white savior or whatever. I mean, it's an ugly thing, but sometimes those outside resources are really appreciated, and is bringing them to bear and popularizing things, and then stepping aside and allowing the indigenous people whose cause we're championing to then step into that role and then guide the fight the rest of the way. I think that's the best way to go, so that we shift from being saviors to allies, who are providing the resources and just being there for them and whatever they need.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. We're tools that they can use if they wish.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
So it's been an hour. We have so many more questions, but I don't think we have the time.
I am really, really sorry that we just totally just went off where I.
No, I loved it. This conversation was fabulous.
Awesome.
It's just there's so many more things we have to ask you. We'll just have to have you back on.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Megan. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Yes, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Us too.
I really appreciate the work that the translation work you're doing, this activism work that you're doing, and it was so lovely to meet you virtually and chat with you.
Likewise. You guys be safe. Hunker down.
Yeah, I'm hunkered.
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Bye, guys.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.